What if evil didn't look like a monster? What if it didn't hide in dark alleys or abandoned buildings? What if it lived right next to you? A quiet man, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of person you'd barely notice. But behind that door, there was something no one could imagine. Something so disturbing that even experienced police officers would struggle to process it. This is not just a story about a killer. This is a story about silence, missed warnings, and horrors happening in plain sight. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At first, nothing seemed unusual. A normal family, a normal home. But sometimes, the darkest stories don't start with obvious signs. They start quietly. As a child, Jeffrey was withdrawn. He struggled to connect with others. While other kids laughed and played, he observed, watched, stayed silent. And then came the curiosity. Not about toys, not about games, but about death. He became obsessed with what animals looked like on the inside. Roadkill fascinated him. He would pick up dead animals, bring them home, and dissect them. Not out of anger, not out of rage, but curiosity. Cold, emotionless curiosity. His father, a chemist, once showed him how to preserve animal bones using chemicals. For most kids, this would be a strange memory. For Jeffrey, it became something else. Something that would stay with him. Something that would grow. At home, things weren't stable. His parents argued constantly. The house felt tense, unpredictable. And slowly, Jeffrey began to disconnect even more. Until one day, his parents separated. And for a brief period of time, Jeffrey Dahmer was left completely alone in the house. No supervision, no guidance, no emotional support, just silence. And in that silence, something inside him began to change. Jeffrey had just graduated high school. He stood at the edge of adulthood, but mentally, he was already lost. One day, driving down a quiet road, he saw a hitchhiker, a young man named Stephen Hicks. Jeffrey offered him a ride. They talked, they laughed, they drank together. For a moment, it felt like connection, something Jeffrey had always struggled with. But then, Hicks said he needed to leave, and something inside Jeffrey snapped. Not anger, not hatred, fear. Fear of being alone again. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. He picked up a weight and struck him. Once, twice, again, until there was silence. That was the moment. The line had been crossed. And instead of panic, there was control. Jeffrey dismembered the body. Carefully, methodically, he buried the remains in his backyard. And then, he went back to his normal life. As if nothing had happened. Years passed, and on the surface, it looked like Jeffrey Dahmer was trying to become normal. He enrolled in college, hoping to build a future. But the structure didn't hold. The focus wasn't there. And soon he dropped out. His father, desperate to set him on the right path, sent him to the army. A place built on discipline, control, order, everything Jeffrey lacked. For a moment, it seemed like things might change. But beneath the uniform, nothing had changed. The same darkness, the same urges were still there, waiting. Eventually, even the army couldn't contain him. He was discharged, not for violence, but for something just as telling: alcohol abuse. Alcohol became his escape, his shield, his way of quieting the thoughts that refused to leave him alone. Day after day, night after night, he drank, not for pleasure, but to forget. But the truth is, you can't run from something that lives inside your own mind. No matter how much he tried to suppress it, the urge never left. It didn't fade. It didn't weaken. It grew. Slowly. Silently. And then it came back. stronger than before, darker than ever, more demanding. By the mid-1980s, Jeffrey Dahmer had stopped fighting it, and that's when the killings began again. But this time, this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't panic. This was calculated, controlled, planned. He knew exactly what he was doing. And more terrifying than that, he knew how to get away with it. Jeffrey began frequenting bars, places filled with noise, laughter, people looking for connection. That's where he found them. Young men, often alone, often trusting. He didn't force them. He didn't chase them. He approached them calmly. Soft voice, relaxed posture. A normal man, starting a normal conversation. There was nothing threatening about him. Nothing that raised alarms. Sometimes he said it was for photos. Sometimes just for company. Drinks. Conversation. Simple. Harmless. Almost too easy to refuse. And that was the trap. Because once they said yes, once they stepped into his world, there was no turning back. They would follow him into his apartment. A quiet place. A private space. A place that felt safe, at least at first. But behind that door, everything changed. The drinks were prepared, stronger than they seemed, laced without their knowledge. Conversation would fade, voices would slow, vision would blur, and one by one, they lost control. And that's exactly what Jeffrey wanted. Because once they entered his apartment, they weren't guests anymore. They were trapped. Jeffrey didn't just want to kill. For him, murder wasn't the end. It was only part of something deeper. What he wanted was control. Complete control. Not for a moment. Not for a night. But forever. He didn't want people to leave him. Didn't want rejection. Didn't want abandonment. Didn't want to wake up alone ever again. So in his mind, he began to imagine something impossible. A person who would never say no, never walk away, never leave. Someone who would exist only for him. And that's when his thoughts turned into experiments. It always began the same way. A drink, a smile, a false sense of safety. He would drug his victims quietly, carefully, until their bodies began to slow. Their words would slur, their movements would weaken, and eventually, they would lose consciousness. That's when the real horror began. In the stillness of his apartment, with no one watching, no one listening, Jeffrey would begin, not in rage, not in panic, but with a disturbing sense of focus. He would take a drill and carefully, slowly, make a hole into the skull. Not to kill, but to change, to control. He believed that if he could alter the brain, he could remove free will, remove resistance. He could create what he wanted, something that would stay. He tried everything. Chemicals, acids, boiling water, substances he barely understood, used in ways no one should ever imagine. Each time he watched, waited, hoping for a different outcome, hoping that this time it would work, that this time they wouldn't leave. But reality never changed. The body would react, convulse, fail, and slowly, life would slip away. Every time, death was always the result. By 1988, Jeffrey Dahmer had moved into a new place in Milwaukee, a small apartment, Unit 213. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary. Just another door in a long hallway. Inside a quiet building. People passed by it every day. Neighbors came and went. Laughter echoed through the corridors. Normal life happening just inches away. And behind that door lived a man who didn't stand out. Quiet, polite, soft-spoken. The kind of neighbor you might nod at, but never really notice. Some described him as strange, a little distant, but nothing more than that. Nothing that would make you afraid. But inside that apartment, nothing was normal. Inside, there was horror. Not sudden, not chaotic, but slow, organized, methodical. Jeffrey didn't just commit his crimes, he documented them. Photographs, carefully taken, step by step, moment by moment. Images that captured things no human should ever see. They weren't random. They weren't rushed. They were deliberate. A record of control. Around the apartment, there were items that didn't belong in any home. Skulls, cleaned, preserved. Bones, separated, stored. Drawers that held things no one would ever expect. And in the kitchen stood something that made the entire place even more disturbing. A refrigerator. From the outside, it looked like any other. But inside, it didn't just hold food. The air in the apartment was heavy, thick, unnatural. There was a smell, at first faint, easy to ignore, but over time, it became impossible to escape. Rotting, sickening. It seeped into the hallway, into the walls, into the lives of the people living around him. Neighbors noticed. Of course they did. They complained. Again and again. What is that smell? Where is it coming from? It didn't make sense. It didn't feel right. But every time, there was an explanation. Jeffrey would smile. Stay calm. Speak softly. It's just bad meat. A simple answer. An ordinary excuse. And somehow that was enough. No one pushed further. No one forced their way inside. No one truly questioned it. Because sometimes, the human mind chooses the easiest explanation, even when something feels wrong, even when the truth is far more disturbing. And so, life continued. People walked past apartment 213 every single day, unaware that just on the other side of that door was one of the most horrifying scenes in modern history. One night, everything almost ended. It was late, the kind of night where the streets feel quieter, where most people are asleep, where nothing unusual is expected to happen. But inside apartment 213, something had already gone wrong. A young boy, just 14 years old, managed to escape. He stumbled out of the building, barefoot, disoriented, barely aware of where he was. His body was weak, drugged. His movements were slow, unsteady, like he was fighting just to stay conscious. He didn't fully understand what was happening. He just knew one thing. He needed to get away. So he ran out into the street, into the open, into what should have been safety. People saw him. A child in a condition that didn't make sense. Confused, vulnerable, clearly in danger. They stopped. They looked. Some stepped closer. Something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. So they did what anyone would do. They called the police. This was the moment. The moment where everything could have ended. The moment where lives could have been saved. The moment where the truth was standing right there in the open. All it needed was for someone to see it. Police arrived. They approached the boy, spoke to him, tried to understand what was happening, but he couldn't explain. Not clearly, not fully. His words were broken, his body too weak. And then, Jeffrey Dahmer appeared. Calm, collected, completely in control. No panic, no fear, just a man walking toward the officers as if nothing was wrong. He spoke softly, confidently. "This is my boyfriend." A pause. "We just had a fight." Simple, direct, believable. And in that moment, something unthinkable happened. Despite the boy's condition, despite the confusion, despite the obvious signs that something wasn't right, they believed him. The officers laughed it off, treated it like a domestic situation. They handed the boy back to him. No questions, no resistance. Just like that, the door closed again, and whatever chance there was gone. Inside that apartment, the nightmare continued, and that boy, who had come so close to escaping, so close to being saved, did not survive. Sometimes, the most terrifying part of a story isn't the monster. It's the moment when the monster was almost stopped and wasn't. July 22nd, 1991. It started like so many nights before. Jeffrey Dahmer went out, blending into the city, just another face in the crowd. That's where he met him, a man named Tracy Edwards. At first, there was nothing unusual, just a conversation. Casual, normal. An offer followed. Money in exchange for company. A few drinks, maybe some photos. Simple, harmless. At least, that's how it sounded. And so, Tracy agreed. They walked back together to apartment 213, the same door, the same space, the same place, where so many others had walked in and never walked out. But this time, something was different. From the moment he stepped inside, Tracy felt it. Something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, unnatural. There was a smell, faint but disturbing, something he couldn't ignore. He tried to stay calm, tried to act normal, but his instincts were already warning him. Danger. They talked, sat together. Time passed slowly, too slowly, and then something shifted. Jeffrey's behavior changed, subtle at first, but noticeable. His tone, his movements, his eyes. And then, Tracy saw it. A knife. Not hidden, not by accident. Just there. A silent signal that something was very wrong. In that moment, everything inside him screamed one thing: run. But running wasn't easy. Not in that space. Not under that pressure. So he waited, watched, looked for an opening. And when it came, he took it. He broke free, forced his way out, ran out of the apartment, down the hallway, out into the street, breathing hard, heart racing, alive. He flagged down police, desperate, trying to explain. This time they listened. Officers followed him back to the building, back to apartment 213, the same door that had hidden the truth for so long. They knocked, entered. At first, it looked normal, but then they saw them. Photographs, Polaroids, scattered, hidden, images that showed everything. Not just proof, but horror. The officers froze. Trained professionals suddenly face to face with something beyond comprehension. And as they looked further, the truth unfolded. Inside drawers, inside cabinets, inside the refrigerator, inside the bedroom. Everywhere they turned, there were signs, evidence, remains. The apartment was no longer just a crime scene. It was a nightmare, a place where reality itself felt broken. And in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't just a killer. This was something far worse. Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested, right there, inside his own apartment. No escape, no explanation, no way out. After years of silence, years of missed chances, years of unimaginable horror, the nightmare was finally exposed. But for many, it was already too late, because behind that door, the truth had been waiting for far too long. During the trial, the world was watching. Courtrooms are usually places of order, of structure, of controlled emotion. But this was different. This wasn't just another case. This was something that had already shaken the entire country. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the walls. Cameras waited outside. People weren't just curious. They were trying to understand. How could something like this happen? How could one man commit acts so disturbing and go unnoticed for so long? And then, he entered the courtroom, Jeffrey Dahmer. No anger, no resistance, no attempt to hide. Just a quiet man, walking to his seat, as if this were all inevitable. When the proceedings began, there was no dramatic denial, no attempt to twist the story, because Dahmer didn't deny anything. He confessed, not partially, not carefully, completely. 17 murders. The number alone was enough to shock the world. But it wasn't just the number. It was what came with it. Cannibalism, necrophilia, acts so disturbing that even describing them in court felt unbearable. At times, the room fell completely silent, not because there was nothing to say, but because no one could process it. Families of the victims sat there, just feet away, listening, hearing details no one should ever have to hear. Pain, anger, grief, all of it filled the room. And yet, through all of it, Dahmer remained calm, detached, almost as if he were observing his own story instead of living it. His defense team had one argument: insanity. They claimed that no sane person could commit acts like these, that his mind was broken, distorted, beyond control. And for a moment, it raised a question. Was he truly aware of what he was doing, or was he lost inside something he couldn't control? But the court didn't see it that way. After reviewing everything, the evidence, the testimonies, the confessions, they reached a conclusion. He knew. He understood his actions. He understood the consequences, and that meant one thing: he was legally sane. The verdict came down guilty, not once, not twice, but over and over again. 17 lives, 17 counts, 17 irreversible tragedies. And then, the sentence: 15 consecutive life terms, a punishment designed for one purpose: to ensure he would never walk free again. No second chances, no escape, no return to the world outside, just walls, steel, and time, a lifetime, to sit with everything he had done. For the families, it wasn't closure. Nothing could undo what had happened. Nothing could bring their loved ones back. But it was something, an end to the man who had caused so much pain. And as the courtroom slowly emptied, one thing became clear. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer was no longer hidden. The truth was out, and the world would never forget it. In prison, Jeffrey Dahmer was no longer in control, just another inmate, locked behind steel bars. But inside prison, everyone knew his name. Everyone knew what he had done, and one day, that past caught up with him. November 1994. During a routine work assignment, another inmate attacked him. No warning, no time to react, just violence. Fast, brutal. Within minutes, it was over. And just like that, the man who created so much horror was gone. No escape, no redemption. If this story left you disturbed, that's because it should.